It's the southernmost point in Nova Scotia, and when it's sunny, it can feel almost Caribbean. It's a popular place for festivities, picnickers, explorers, hikers, and sheep herders. It's got a rich history here, a lighthouse, shipwrecks, even an old Marconi wireless station. Cape Sable, it's out there in the fog somewhere. That's where I'm on my walkabout today. First, a bit about naming. Cape Sable, where I'm hiking today, is an island. It's an island or sandbar of sorts. It's about 340 meters off the Hawk on Cape Sable Island, the southernmost point of land on Nova Scotia that you can reach without a boat. Cape Sable Island was an island, but it isn't really anymore since a solid causeway with no passage through it was built in the 1940s. Locals rarely refer to this sandbar as Cape Sable, but rather more often as just the Cape, and Cape Sable Island is referred to often as just Cape Sable. To add one more wrinkle, I've been to Cape Sable a number of times, and when I tell people I'm going to Cape Sable, they often think I mean Sable Island, famous for its horses and much further offshore. They are different places, but both get their names from the French word sable, meaning sand. I started my hike at the north end of the island at Fish Inlet. Now, Fish Inlet is a bit of water that's between the Cape and Fish Island. That inlet connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Hawk Channel, and the Hawk Channel is what allows boats to make it into shore in deep enough water that's actually between the very shallow mud flats. One of the boats you frequently see here is the Cape Islander, which is one of the most common boats in the lobster fishery in Nova Scotia. It was first built by Ephraim Atkinson of Cape Sable Island in 1907. It's summer right now, but in the fall, these dunes are home to monarch butterflies and red admiral butterflies, as well as high-flying dragonflies, who use this as a staging area before heading west across the Gulf of Maine and then heading south for winter. Cape Sable is also considered an important bird area. Each time I come to this island, I see lots of birds. I certainly can't identify all the species, but for example, in late winter and early spring, the flats of the Hawk Channel are home to about 6% of the Atlantic brant population, and 1/4 of the Nova Scotia population of piping plover nest on this island. That may seem like a lot for that species, but it is so threatened that accounts in a recent year for only 9 nesting pairs. In the year 2000, only 14 individual piping plovers were seen here. By contrast, 250,000 of their cousins, the semi-palmated piping plover, were counted on the beaches here in the same year. Because of the location of this piece of land, it's also an important migratory stop for shorebirds. There are 11 species of shorebird for whom this is considered their single most important staging area. I've just stopped by one of the many ponds on this island that is home to shorebirds, and just a few moments ago there were some shorebirds here. They're coming and going. There are so many different species you can find here. It's a birder's paradise. The other thing we've been seeing a lot of are sheep tracks. Now, the sheep, of course, are not naturally occurring, and surprisingly enough, they can be harder to find than the birds because they hide in the dunes. But sheep have been kept on islands off Nova Scotia by shepherds for well over 100 years. And the reason is very simple. There is an abundant supply of food. You don't need to have them in barns. And of course, there are no predators. And so what happens is those shepherds come over a couple of times a year, once bringing rams over so that the female sheep can be bred and there can be lambs later in the season. And then they come over later in the year to shear them. I'm not sure how many sheep are on this island, but there are a lot. Perhaps not as many as hundreds of years ago, but there's still a lot. And many of the older people who live on Cape Sable Island have told me they remember when the entire community would come over here and help round up the animals at shearing time. It was a community event of sorts. Schools even closed sometimes to let the kids help. These days, the community of Cape Sable Island still holds a festival over here. Every August, they host Cape Days, but it doesn't include sheep herding. That is now done by shepherds and their dogs. I'm coming up towards Black Point, which is the western edge of Cape Sable. I'm hiking on the inland side at the moment, and if I could see through the fog, I would actually see Cape Sable Island and over towards the Hawk, see exactly the point from which I got a boat to come over here. It's a little too foggy for that now. The tide has come in, and what that tide is covering are basically almost like mud flats. I mean, it's really a squishy sand, nothing that you would really want to get caught in. Now, over at the Hawk, which is the southernmost point that you can get to in Nova Scotia without taking a boat, when it's low tide, the sand and the mud reveals a secret. Below the high tide waters is an ancient forest believed to be over 1,500 years old. It's not clear how the forest became submerged, but it seems likely it was either sea level rise or a bog-like area being breached by the sea permanently. A paper in 1934 observed that at sites like that, the drowning of trees is likely very slow, which is what allowed the trees to remain upright and the remains to still now be seen. There are other things more man-made that from time to time appear at low tide around the Cape. For example, again over at the Hawk, there is what appears to be a man-made structure which has appeared in recent years. There's a lot of speculation as to what the purpose of the structure was and whether it might have been from the 17th century and tied to the Portuguese, Basque, and Spanish. Mysteries abound when you are in a place as exposed as this, and every tide hides or reveals things from the past, as well as drawing new items ashore from the ocean. I've reached the halfway point of my hike today. If it weren't for the fog, I would be able to see the Cape Sable lighthouse in the distance. Unfortunately, the fog has really moved in, which is a little unusual for this time of day and this time of year here. It's about 2.5 kilometers to that lighthouse, and that's where I'll be headed after the break. I'm on Cape Sable, which is the southernmost point in Nova Scotia. I started today's hike at a point of land along Fish Inlet. I worked my way around the western point, and I'm now headed towards the lighthouse. It is a foggy day here today, and I mentioned before that lots of different things can wash up on the beach, and one of those things is bones. These are the bones of different marine animals who have passed away at sea or perhaps on the beach, and now their remains can be found here. That is how this ocean changes this land all the time. One of the other things that can happen here is it can get really, really windy, and I'm very fortunate that that is not the case today. So windy, in fact, that when there was a lighthouse keeper here, the lighthouse keeper's house actually leaned sideways. These days, the predominant feature on the island is the lighthouse. On a clear day, you can see it from the mainland, and as long as you're not blocked by a dune, from pretty much anywhere on the Cape. It's a little surprising to me that, despite a history of wrecks along this coast, the first lighthouse on this island was not constructed until 1861. It was the wreck of the Hungarian in 1860 that finally triggered the province to act. The Hungarian had successfully crossed the Atlantic and was leaving Liverpool in February on its way to Portland, Maine. The captain was watching off this shore. He knew that the shallow waters went out as much as 4 miles from this coast, and he certainly didn't want to run aground. But unfortunately, he was unable to miss them. The ship sunk, and all 205 lives were lost. While people on Cape Sable Island saw the distress flares at 3 o'clock in the morning on that wintry night, they couldn't reach the ship with the darkness and heavy seas. The dawn light allowed residents to see people clinging to the ship's masts, but with the heavy winter seas, no one could get to the ship to help. Legend says one of the personal belongings found after the wreck was a diary with the words, "Lizzie dies tonight." a line that would inspire a popular folk ballad of the time. Joe Howe was the provincial secretary of Nova Scotia, and he implored neighboring New Brunswick to help fund a lighthouse on Cape Sable. But in the end, the Nova Scotia government was forced to go it alone. It's always nice to hike on a sunny day, but the fog here, well, this really helps explain why a lighthouse was so important here. By the time one opened, more lives had been lost off Cape Sable than anywhere else in Nova Scotia. I'm going to show you some pictures of what this place looks like when it's sunny, just so you get an idea of how different it looks. But on November 12th, 1861, that first lighthouse opened, and the lighthouse keeper was John Harvey Doane. The 65-foot tower had red lights rather than white, despite a white light being recommended. It took 19 lamps to shine through the red glazing in the glass, but the color was hard to see beyond a few miles from shore. By 1869, the full red light was abandoned and instead was changed to a sort of red and white striping. This greatly improved visibility. Ever in search of improvements, 1 year later it was changed again to a flashing white light. There would be a number of improvements here over the years. In 1876, they installed a fog alarm system here. You can probably hear the more modern one in the distance now. In 1897, they put a lifeboat here. Now, that was a little weird because it had no crew, just the coxswain, who was also the lighthouse keeper. 3 years later, they would move that lifeboat to Clark's Harbor on Cape Sable Island, where there were actually people who could man it. There would be no significant changes to the light itself until 1902, over 30 years later, when they would install a white Fresnel glass lens. That happened to be the same year that up in Cape Breton, a young Italian by the name of Marconi was sending his first wireless transmission across the ocean. With that first communication from Glace Bay to England on December 15th, 1902, a new age of communication began. The federal government saw benefits and invested $80,000 to create a network of Marconi wireless stations. One was constructed here in 1905. Marconi station here consisted of a tall wooden mast supported by guy wires, as well as a number of buildings for living quarters and for the operators to actually do their work. When it first opened, it focused on commercial messaging for ships, but with the coming of World War I, in 1915, it transitioned to a direction-finding station. It was one of 4 on the East Coast. The others were at Chebucto Head in Halifax, Canso, Nova Scotia, and the last one in Cape Race, Newfoundland. After the war ended, it returned to its original function of passing on commercial ship messages. The lighthouse, which is on the Cape today, was opened in 1932 and is just over 100 feet tall, constructed of concrete. During World War II, the keepers here witnessed sailors coming ashore after their boats had been sunk by U-boats, something that happened relatively often around the coast. The lighthouse was a beacon, not only for safety of ships sailing the ocean, but also it operated as a sign of hope to row lifeboats towards when those ships were sunk offshore, either by accident or U-boats. This is the tallest lighthouse in Nova Scotia and is still a critical part of the safety system for seafarers. The lighthouse, however, is no longer manned. In 1986, the last keeper left, and the light was for a time remotely operated from the Cape Foreshoe Lighthouse in Yarmouth. Today, the lighthouse, like most in the region, is operated from New Brunswick. On July 28, 1989, the Heritage Review Office of the Canadian government designated the lighthouse on Cape Sable a classified building, which is the highest level of heritage protection possible. This is Cape Light, and this is my destination for today's hike. I've made it around from Fish Inlet, following the beach of the Cape all the way to here. It's been an absolutely beautiful day. Sure, it's a bit foggy, but when you're looking for a lighthouse, that seems somewhat appropriate. This is always an interesting place to come, and it's relatively easy to get here from Cape Sable Island. Whether you're coming for Cape Days, or you're coming to see the lighthouse, you're going for a swim, or perhaps you want to come over and watch sheep shearing. It's always interesting, and there's a lot of history here. Back across the causeway in Barrington, there is also a lot of history, and much of it is actually tied to this cape. And that's where I'll be after the break. At one time, trains rumbled along rail lines all across this province, including right here in Barrington, where the Halifax Southwestern line ran along this route all the way to Yarmouth. Now, like many other former rail lines, this one has become a very popular trail, the Barrington Bay Trail. I'm starting this journey on Wireless Station Road, and it's the wireless station that used to be at the end of this road that I start my walkabout with today. When I was on Cape Sable earlier, I talked about the Marconi Telegraph Station, which closed down in the 1920s. With the outbreak of World War I, the British Admiralty and the Canadian government decided they needed a new station in Barrington Passage, despite the Marconi station that already existed near here. The reason was the Marconi stations were out of date and couldn't communicate with British ships when they were in waters off Nova Scotia. The new station in Barrington Passage would be able to provide communication within a 600-mile radius, and even, if necessary, as far as Florida, just by adjusting wavelengths. The Barrington Wireless Station went on the air on April 10th, 1915. Now, the facility here was big. It not only had the radio equipment, but it had accommodations for soldiers, sporting facilities, meal facilities. During the war, between 50 and 65 soldiers were stationed in Barrington at any one time. The station ultimately closed down in 1922 and maintained a small presence just sort of guarding what was there. But the towers were taken down in 1936, and the station was relegated to history. These days, there's not much on the site, except for a few foundations. (1905), the year when the Marconi Wireless Station on Cape Sable was just opening. Well, it was also a year something else was happening in this area. The railway expanded. In 1899, a rail line had opened from Barrington to Yarmouth, but in April 1905, the Halifax and Southwest Railway purchased the Liverpool and Milton Tramway. They had constructed a short section of line somewhere on a route between Bridgewater and Barrington, and Halifax and Southwest completed it the same year. Over the next year, they upgraded and finished the line all the way through to Yarmouth, improving connections for people here at a time that travel between Nova Scotia communities was either by train or coal steamer. When Halifax and Southwestern acquired this line, they actually ended up picking up a number of other lines from the tramway, which was headquartered in Bridgewater at the time. They had lines that went to Digby, to Caledonia, and well into timber country. By 1906, you could connect across the province from Barrington and even onto the intercolonial railway system through a station at Halifax's Africville. Now, ultimately, this rail line, the Halifax and Southwestern, would merge with Canadian Northern Railways, which would run into financial difficulty during World War I and be nationalized in 1918 to become Canadian National Railways, or CN Rail. The Owl was a popular daily passenger freight train that made round trips throughout Shelburne and Yarmouth counties during the 1920s. And with the 1950s came the transition from steam to diesel, but the end was near. In 1967, the last postal car made its run, and passenger service ended here on Saturday, October the 25th, 1969. The station started to fall into disrepair, and freight service came to an end in 1981. In 1982, the line from Liverpool to Yarmouth was formally abandoned. I'm just approaching Station Road in Barrington Passage, and as you might imagine, the name for that road comes from the fact that this is where the train station was. Now, that train station is obviously long gone now. Its memory survives only in photos. This area was first known by Acadians as Backrow. It was a thriving settlement until it was destroyed by the British during the expulsion. The village of Barrington was reconstructed in 1761 by Cape Cod and Nantucket fishermen who named the area for Viscount Barrington, Britain's war secretary. The Barrington Township covered a wide area up to beyond Port Clyde. The part of the Barrington Township I'm in now, Barrington Passage, applied the French name for the area, which was Passage de Backrow, to the Barrington name to distinguish different parts of the community. Well, this trail continues on all the way to Yarmouth, but I've reached the commercial area of Barrington Passage, and this is where I'm going to turn off to head down to a small park overlooking the Cape Sable Island Causeway and Lighthouse Channel. These days, Barrington, closer to where I started, is the municipal center, and Barrington Passage, where I am now, is the commercial center of this area. This business area is where everyone comes for everything from fast food to gas and groceries. This is Island View Park, and over here, well, that's the Cape Sable Island Causeway. Before the causeway, a steam ferry connected the mainland to the island. And of course, beyond Cape Sable Island is Cape Sable itself, where that Marconi wireless station was. The Marconi station saw the expansion of the railway, and the railway saw most of the first 100 years of Canada as a country. You know, this area here, Barrington Passage, is still a vibrant community. It is still rooted in fishing, just like when the railway started, just like when the Marconi station started. Novelist Richard Russo once said that in small towns, much more than cities, people are rooted by a common destiny. And I think that's true here. I think it's true in many of the places we visit, and I hope it's something you think about on your next walkabout.
Sunshine.